welcome to the course of Class 11th Tamil Nadu Book of Indian History. And here we are covering ancient history, and we've already covered a very wide part of ancient history, starting from the prehistoric times, going till Harappa. Then we moved on to the Vedic culture. Then we also covered the Mauryan Empire and the various Mahajanpadas, also covering the rise of two new religions of Buddhism and Jainism. And then we also covered about the Sangam age, which included Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas. Now we finally are here after covering Kushanas and the Kanishka's rule. Now we will be starting with a very important chapter and a very interesting part of Indian history, which is basically Gupta Empire. This course has been presented to you by Plus Prameshi Library, and you should definitely visit their website as well as the YouTube channel for such more awesome courses. Here I am, your mentor and educator for this course, and my name is Supriya Singhal. Here you can read about me, and also you can follow me on Crispy Stories, which is basically a food blog. And I know, a little different choice, but definitely you will find some interesting stories to share. So here we will start with Unit 4 of Class 11th Tamil Nadu book. And the chapter we are starting is basically Lesson 9, which is Gupta Empire. So here you will find that there are plenty of source materials, because we already know that starting from the Vedic age we got literary evidences, and those literary evidences we were even able to decipher. So we knew what they wanted to tell, and that is why you will find that even Mauryan Empire, post-Mauryan Empire, and then now Gupta Empire, these are the ages which we also called as, ages of literature, because we have so much of information about them from so many different sources that it becomes easy to actually verify the facts that you might have gotten from one place. Okay, so there are plenty of source materials through which we can reconstruct the history of Gupta Empire. They include even literary sources, as I told you. They include epigraphical sources, and they also include numismatic sources. Before we move forward, we should know that numismatic sources and their importance was a question asked by UPSC in their mains examination. Okay, like how numismatic sources are an important part of rediscovering or reconstructing history, and you have to explain it using some examples. So here you should have started with Mauryan Empire and their coins, which you need to tell me in the comment, like which coins were introduced then. Similarly, you must have found that even post-Mauryan Empire during Kanishka's period, they were like coins. Similarly, Satvahans, right? Numismatic actually means basically coins, dealing with coins. Okay, reading through coins, deciphering these coins. So Mauryan, post-Mauryan, Satvahans, and even now Guptas. So their age, basically they had lot of these coins. If you study these coins, you will actually get to know that which ruler used to like what, okay, and which ruler used to follow which god, and which gods are more prevalent in the common people. So such information is very evident from studying these coins. Okay, then you will find that here only in Gupta period there was something called as Puranas, which we already know because Puranas have been so widely discussed also. So Puranas, they throw light on the royal genealogy of the Gupta kings, like who came after whom, and then what happened in a particular Gupta Empire's period, etc., Gupta king period, etc. Then there are contemporary literary works which are not exactly of the Gupta Empire, but you can say that somewhere they are writing either about Gupta Empire or they are writing about the kings that were contemporary to Gupta Empire. And such works include Devi Chandragupta and Mudra Rakshasam. And before we move forward, you need to tell me who wrote Mudra Rakshasam, because we have already discussed that. Okay, so it is written by Vishakha Datta. So Vishakha Datta wrote two books, Devi Chandraguptam and Mudra Rakshasam. Okay, and you must know that Devi Chandraguptam was about whom and Mudra Rakshasam was about whom. That you need to tell me in the comment box below. Okay, and they provided the information regarding the rise of Guptas. The Chinese traveler, Chinese traveler Fa Hian, you need to remember, because this was a question asked in UPSC mains. Okay, UPSC mains, they asked you about Arab and Chinese travelers. Okay, so in Arab travelers you will study like little later on. Chinese travelers, you have to write about three Chinese travelers. One is Fa Hian, okay, another one is Yun Sang, and then was Ai Seng. So Fa Hian visits during Gupta Empire, Yun Sang will visit later during Harsha's empire, and Ai Seng will visit like much later. Okay, so these three you should have mentioned in your answer. Similarly, when we study the medieval period, you will realize there is much more incoming of the Arab ambassadors, Arab travelers, and then you had to mention some names. For example, Al-Biruni, etc. Okay. So the Chinese traveler Fahian, he visited India during the reign of Chandragupta II, and he left a valuable account about the social, economical and religious conditions of Gupta Empire. Okay, and before we move forward, you need to tell me about Megasthenes. So Megasthenes was an ambassador from whose court? Okay, which was what country, or which country did he belong to, and what was the name of the book that he wrote? Then apart from these literary sources, there are inscriptions. For example, Mehrauli Iron Pillar, which we already know because Mehrauli is in Delhi. Okay, there if you go, you will find this iron pillar. And then there is an Allahabad pillar inscription also. So just like in Mauryan Empire, you had inscriptions written on rocks and pillars. Therefore, in Gupta Empire also, you have certain inscriptions written on pillars. For example, Mehrauli and Allahabad pillar. And these inscriptions also tell you something about the empire or something about the society. The first, this one, the Mehrauli Iron Pillar is basically referring to the achievements of the Chandragupta I. Okay, Chandragupta I, who is the, you can say, like a famous ruler of Gupta Empire. Okay, whose son is Samudragupta. But the most important source of the reign of Samudragupta is basically in the Allahabad Pillar inscription. Okay, in Allahabad Pillar inscription, like the Samudragupta's poet Hari Sena, he has written about Samudragupta's personality. Okay, and also his achievements. This inscription is engraved on an Ashokan pillar. Okay, that means it was an Ashokan pillar, and then you will find out that Samudragupta has also written something on it. Okay, it is written in classical Sanskrit, that you need to remember, and the script that has been used is Nagari. I told you script is what we write and language is what we speak. Okay, so Sanskrit is the language, but script that has been used like A, B, C, D, A, E, these are the script. So the script is Nagari. Okay, it consists of 33 lines of Prashasti, basically for praising someone, for praising the ruler, and written by his court poet Hari Sena. Okay, it describes the circumstances of Samudragupta's accession, his military campaigns in North India, in Deccan, and his relationship with contemporary rulers. So it is describing you in just 33 lines. It is telling you so much. Okay, and also his accomplishments. And in this inscription only, he has been Hari Sena has written how Samudragupta is also a poet and a scholar. And this was asked in UPSC prelims. Okay. So the coins issued by Gupta kings, they also contain legends and figures, and these coins provide you interesting details about the titles and the sacrifices which were performed by these different Gupta monarchs. Now we will take one by one each of these Gupta rulers, and then we will study about them. So first we are starting with Chandragupta, but before that you need to know who founded the Gupta dynasty. So the founder of the Gupta dynasty was Sri Gupta, and he was succeeded by Ghatotkacha. And then you will realize that these two, Sri Gupta and Ghatotkacha, they were also called as Maharajas. Okay, but you will find that not much information is available in inscriptions or literary works about Ghatotkacha or Sri Gupta. But the next famous ruler, okay, for whom we have a lot of information and we study, is Chandragupta I, and he was the first one in this Gupta Empire to actually adopt the title of Maha-Adhiraj. Okay, Maharaj Adhiraj. That means in the kings also, he is the great one, like the great king of kings. Okay, and this title indicates how extensively he must have conquested, he must have expanded the empire to actually adopt this title. Okay, he strengthened, just like I told you, there are two ways to strengthen your empire, either war or matrimonial alliances. So he strengthened this position by matrimonial alliances with Lichavis. And there was one more dynasty or one more person who actually strengthened this position with the matrimonial alliance with Lichavis. That you need to tell me in the comment box below. And you know that war was very, very long. It was 17 years, and finally Buddha also intervened in that. Okay. So he married Kumar Devi. This you need to know because she was a princess of royal family, and this added to the power and prestige of the Gupta family, because once you are marrying another princess of another clan, that means that somewhere you have established relations and you won't be actually going on war with them. The Mehrauli Iron Pillar inscription, it is the inscription which mentions about Chandragupta I, okay, his conquest, his victory, etc. And Chandragupta I is considered to be the real founder of Gupta era, which starts in 320 AD. This you need to remember. So Sri Gupta is the founder of Gupta dynasty, but Chandragupta I is the founder of Gupta era. Okay, because from this only we consider that we have so many sources to understand the Gupta dynasty, and through his empire we actually say that he started building an empire. So Sri Gupta must have placed the foundation, but it was Chandragupta who finally basically broadened this empire. Then we have the second ruler of this Gupta dynasty, like who is very famous, is Samudragupta, who is actually the son of Chandragupta I and Kumara Devi. Okay, so the Samudragupta, he is the greatest rulers of the Gupta dynasty, and the Allahabad pillar inscription. Mind my words, Mehrauli is for Chandragupta I, and Allahabad pillar inscription is basically about Samudragupta and his detailed discussion. This is the same one which we studied here, like Hari Sen one. Okay, and it refers to 3 stages of military campaign. So imagine in 33 lines how much Hari Sen must have written, that he expressed everything that about Samudragupta, his conquest, his expansion strategy, then how he was a poet, how he was a scholar and an able ruler. Okay, so this is as far as you can see. So this here is basically telling you about the campaigns of Samudragupta, okay, which we will first learn and then we will come back to this map again. So you will realize that Samudragupta took 3 campaigns, military campaigns, to actually expand his empire. One was against the rulers of North India. Second was his basically Dakshinapath expedition, where he was wanting to conquer the South India. And then the third one was his campaign, which was again in the North India, and therefore it is called as the second campaign against another rulers of North India. Okay, so now you must be wondering that why has he taken 2 campaigns in North India? So actually in the first campaign, Samudragupta defeated Achyuta and Nagasen. Okay, Achyuta was the Naga ruler, and Nagasen belonged to this Kota family, which was ruling this upper Gangetic Valley period. Okay, and these 2 were defeated, and obviously after defeating them, what will the king do? They will try to basically annex that kingdom, so that they can proudly say that they have annexed this part and now their empire extends in the last boundary. Okay, now what is happening is, then Samudragupta, as I told you, this was the first campaign. The second campaign of Samudragupta is basically in the South Indian region. So he marched against the South Indian monarchs, and the Allahabad pillar inscription mentions that how 12 South Indian rulers, okay, were not able to defeat Samudragupta. Okay, and here are the names written of southern Indian rulers, okay, who tried to fight with Samudragupta, but they ultimately got defeated. Okay, but here Samudragupta did not annex the kingdom. He, instead of destroying, he actually annexed those kingdoms, but then then understanding the prestige and the power of the South Indian kings, he actually gave them their kingdoms back. Okay, so something what you might have saw what Alexander also did, right? Alexander, when fought with Porus, remember, he was so impressed by Porus that he gave back the kingdom, even though Alexander defeated Porus. So this is something what even Samudragupta does. Okay, and he only he gave them their empire back, and he only insisted them that you should now acknowledge at least the sovereignty of the Gupta empire, although you can run your kingdoms independently. Okay, and finally is the third stage of Samudragupta's campaign, which was to basically eliminate the remaining kings of North India. Okay, and his rivals. So he now fought against the 9 kings. See, somewhere he is fighting against the 12 kings in South India, is giving him a boost, right? So now he thinks that why have I left few rulers in North India, let me also have a war with them. So he now fights against 9 kingdoms and he uproots them, but in Northern India he never gives back the empire, because Northern India is his stage, right? It's his Kar. So he wants to establish the kingdom there, and that is why he annexed those territories. So these are the 9 kingdoms or 9 kings, okay, which he defeats and finally annexes those territories in his empire. And most of these rulers, you will realize, even in the first campaign and in the third campaign, they were from the Naga family. Okay, so now we go towards the map, and these are basically the expeditions of the Samudragupta. Okay, so here he is going like this and then coming back, first expedition and then second expedition, and then first and third are basically to expand his empire. Okay, now so we know that Samudragupta was a able military ruler, because now he has basically conquest not only in North India but also in South India. And after these military victories, you will realize that Samudragupta used to perform this Ashwamedha sacrifice. Okay, Ashwamedha sacrifice was also performed by Lord Ram, if you have been watching Ramayana, especially during this quarantine period. Okay, he issued gold and silver coins with the legend, and he used to write on those coins as restorer of Ashwamedha. Why is he writing restorer of Ashwamedha? Because you must have realized that after, specifically after Ashoka, there was a rise in Buddhism and Jainism. Even Kanishka, which was the last powerful ruler before Gupta dynasty, was also an ardent follower of Mahayana Buddhism. So somewhere it is seen that Hinduism is actually declining and other religions are basically increasing. So that is why when Samudragupta acquired the empire, he was an ardent Brahmic follower, and therefore you will realize he issued coins which had written that he is a restorer of Ashwamedha. somewhere basically he is trying to increase the Hinduism. And it is actually because of his military achievements that Samudragupta is called as the Indian Napoleon. So if you don't know who is Napoleon, you basically need to study about world history, which is a topic in your UPSC mains examination. And Napoleon, you will study that he was basically a very important part of French Revolution. Okay. So now we will study about the extent of Samudragupta's empire. So you must have realized that Samudragupta was such an able ruler, okay, and his rule must have expanded the empire also. So you will realize that Samudragupta's rule extended the empire over the upper Gangetic Valley, okay, and like UP and central India definitely, then some parts of Bengal also. Okay, and these territories, see, whenever you are in North India, because you can easily go and move around, this territory will be directly under him. But in South, what is happening? In South, these were basically like a tributary state. As I already told you, they were more or less functioning as independent kingdoms, but they were also accepting that yes, finally their head is Gupta, okay, so the Gupta Empire, and they used to pay regular tributes to them. The Saka and Kushan principalities, which were there on the western and northwestern region, were also basically under the influence of Gupta Empire. Okay, and even in the east till Pallavas, you will realize that they used to acknowledge the Gupta superiority. Okay, now after learning about the extent of Samudragupta's empire, we need to study about the estimate of Samudragupta, like about little bit of details about Samudragupta himself. So Samudragupta's military achievement we already know is remarkable, and especially they have created a mark in history. He was, he was not only a great ruler, but he also had other accomplishments. Okay, and this Allahabad pillar, which was written inscription, which was written by Hari Sena, he talks that gives you an expression of how he was a polished intellect. He was also poet, as I told you, and he also used to play veena. So he was interested in music also. Okay, this Hari Sen Allahabad pillar inscription calls Samudragupta as Kaviraj, okay, because of his ability in composing verses, not reciting them but composing them. Okay, his image depicting him with veena is found on the coins which were issued by Samudragupta. Okay, it is a proof that he was very proficient in music. He was a patron of poets and scholars, and one of whom was Hari Sena, who also wrote a Prashasti in the form of Allahabad pillar inscription. Okay, and you must know that he was a very fond of learning, etc., and he also used to basically patronize Sanskrit literature. Okay, he was an ardent follower of Vaishnavism, that we know because he called himself as restorer of Ashwamedha. But having said that, he was never cruel, to other religions. He actually was very tolerant to them, and it is only during Gupta Empire that you will find that Ellora caves came around. Okay, he evinced being keen interest in Buddhism, and he was a patron of Buddhist scholar Vasu Bandhu. And this has been asked in the state services examination, that who was a scholar, who was Buddhist scholar but present in Samudragupta's, he was patronized by Samudragupta, and that is Vasu Bandhu. Then comes the next king after Sri Gupta, Ghatotkacha, Samudragupta I and Samudragupta. Now we have the fifth ruler of Gupta dynasty, but the third great ruler of Gupta dynasty, who is Chandragupta II. So Samudragupta was succeeded by his son Chandragupta II, which was also known as Vikram Aditya. But according to some scholars, this immediate successor of Samudragupta was Ramgupta, his elder brother. But there is not much evidence about it, and generally people consider that Chandragupta II was the one who succeeded the Samudragupta. Okay, and you will realize that Chandragupta II basically he also strengthened and he expanded the empire by matrimonial alliances, just like his father and his grandfather did. He married Kuber Naga. She was a Naga princess of central India. Okay, and he also gave his daughter Prabhavati in marriage to a Vakataka prince Rudrasena II. Okay, and the political importance of this marriage lies that Vakatakas used to occupy a position in the Deccan where earlier Satvahans was present. Okay, and now when Chandragupta has done an alliance with them, so basically there will be no war and there will be peace, and somewhere you will find that they both can now easily fight the third enemy. Now we will talk about the conquest of Western India. Okay, so you will realize that Chandragupta II's main military achievement, if you have to talk about, was his achievement and his conquest against the Saka Satraps. Okay, and we already know that Saka clan or the Sakas were the people of Scythians. They were the people who came from outside to India after defeating Bactria and Parthia, and they established two satraps. One was around this Taxila region or this Peshawar region, other one was basically around this Gujarat Maharashtra region, right? So this Chandragupta II was the one who actually defeated their Saka Satrap of Western India. Rudra Simha III, who was a ruler of the Saka Satrap, the last ruler, he was defeated by Chandragupta II. Okay, and he was dethroned and killed. his territories which were there in Malwa and Kathiawar Peninsula. Where is Kathiawar? It's in Gujarat. Okay, so this Gujarat Peninsula you will find they were annexed to this Gupta Empire because their last ruler is gone. And after this victory, you will find that Chandragupta II or Vikramaditya, he performs a horse sacrifice, and that is when he assumes the title of Sakari. Okay, which means Sakari, which means Saka Ari, that means destroyer of Sakas. Okay, and that is why he also called himself Vikramaditya. Okay, so this has been asked in state services examination, that who was called Sakari, and you should know it was Chandragupta II. And as a result of this conquest of Western India, the western boundary of the empire. So till now what is happening? Samudragupta is expanding empire in the south, but now Chandragupta II is expanding the empire in the west. Okay, the western boundary of empire has now reached till Arabian Sea. And now what they have gotten is basically few access to ports. So ports being Bharuch, Sopara, Cambay and other seaports. And this enabled the Gupta Empire to finally control the trade with the western countries. Okay, Ujjain became a very important commercial city, and soon it also became the alternative capital of Guptas. Okay, the fine cotton of Bengal, indigo from Bihar, silk from Banaras, scents from Himalayas, the sandal and species from south, okay, they were all brought to these ports, and then from here they were exported. And to whom? To the western countries. And western countries who used to export and import with India were included Roman Empire also. Okay, and that is why you will find that in India, why India was called as Sone ki Chidiya? Because India was exporting more than it was importing, and because it was exporting such items like cotton, scent, silk, indigo, which are a huge demand in Europe and other markets, basically India was importing gold, okay, but not by buying money, basically by exporting. So instead of basically, if you give cotton outside, instead of getting suppose anything in barter system in return, you were getting gold coins. Okay, and that is why you will find that India's wealth enormously increased. Okay, and you will find that there was so much of wealth in this empire that Guptas were the one to actually issue lot of gold coins. While Kanishkas were the first one to issue pure gold coins, but it was Gupta who finally issued large number of gold coins. Okay. Now we will also talk about the other conquest of Chandragupta II. So Chandragupta II, he defeated a confederacy of enemy chiefs in Manga region. Okay, he crossed the river Sindh and he conquered the Bactria. Basically, he is going to the northwestern side. The Kushans ruling in this region were also basically subdued, and they identified, okay, fine, that we submit before you. And with these conquests, now Gupta Empire was extending in west as far as Malwa. Okay, in the west as far as the western Malwa, Gujarat and Kathiawar. In the northwest is extended beyond, like till the Hindu Kush region, and in the east it went till Bengal, and finally in the south you will find Narmada is the boundary. Okay, so it's a very, very vast empire. Now, we've already studied that there was a Chinese traveler called Fa Yan who visited during the Gupta's empire. So, which Gupta empire he actually visits? It was Chandragupta II. So, the famous Chinese pilgrim Fa Yan, he visited India during the reign of Chandragupta II. And out of his 9 years which he stayed in India, you should remember that he spent 6 years only in the Gupta empire. And this is very, very important, that Fa Yan visited India via land, okay, but during the land route he was looted and he felt so like uneasy that he decided to go by sea route. Okay, so he visited land, like he came through this land route, and finally what will happen, he goes back to his place via sea route, visiting Ceylon and Java on the way. Ceylon is Sri Lanka and Java is in Indonesia. The main purpose of this visit was to actually see all these Chinese travelers are coming to actually see that how is Buddhism getting practiced in India, is it spreading or not. So and all they wanted to know was the Buddhist artifacts also, and they used to copy and take it back home. Certain sculptures etc. also they used to take back home. So the main purpose of this Fa Yan's visit was to see the land where Buddha was born and to collect some Buddhist manuscripts and certain ideas about the Buddha from India. He stayed in Patliputra, okay, for 3 years first, and he kept on studying Sanskrit so that he could actually translate material from Sanskrit to the language they knew. Okay, and that is why they copied Buddhist text. Now, Fa Yan provides that valuable information on the religious, social and economic condition of the Gupta Empire that time. Okay, according to him, the Buddhism was in flourishing condition in the northwestern India, but especially in this Gangetic Valley where the Gupta Empire had a great hold, it was on state of neglect. Okay, he refers basically this land of Gangetic Valley as a land of Brahmanism, where you will find that Brahmin people, okay, they have increased. The people who are believing in Vaishnavism, or you can say Hinduism, have increased. Fayan also mentions the unsatisfactory state of some of the Buddhist holy places, for example, Kapilavastu and Kushinagra. Kushinagra is the place where he died, and he said that these places were not kept well, and somewhere he also felt that economic conditions were prosperous, but still the sites were not renovated. And although his account is valuable, but he also did not mention the name of Chandragupta II, because he was not interested about writing about politics of the state. His main aim was religion, okay, and he assessed everything from the Buddhist angle. And this is what you had to write in the mains examination. What you had to write? You had to write how basically these Chinese travelers are the great source of checking history, but since they are not providing you complete and accurate detail, because their mindset is very biased. They only want to talk about Buddhism and they want to see history through a Buddhist angle. His observation on social conditions are also sometimes found to be exaggerated, because he's looking at it from a Buddhist angle. Okay, but yet if you have any other source, then there is no harm in verifying it. Okay. Just like we did estimate of Samudragupta, we'll also do estimate of Chandragupta II. So the power and glory of Gupta Empire reached its peak under the rule of Chandragupta II Vikramaditya. Okay, he not only contributed to the military expeditions, but also to the cultural progress of this age, and he patronized Navratnas in his court, and the great literary figures like Kalidas. Okay, he was like patronizing these people, and he himself was a promoter of this artistic activity. Okay, and sometimes Gupta age is called as the golden period. So it is not just because of the economic flourishment and economic prosperity, but also because this was an age of cultural, cultural fulfillment. Okay, wherein you can find Ajanta and Ellora type caves also. You can find Buddhism also rising, Brahmanism also there. Okay, then you can find so many literary works being written, and that is why this was called as the golden age. Okay, and this was a question asked in UPSC mains. So that is why I'm saying this Gupta page or Gupta age is basically a very, very important chapter from prelims as well as mains point of view. Now we will talk about the successors of Chandragupta II. So Kumar Gupta was the son and successor of Chandragupta II, and his reign was basically peaceful, you can say, and full of prosperity, just like his father. And he also issued number of coins and inscriptions which have been found in the entire Gupta empire. He also performed Ashwamedha sacrifice, but most importantly, he was the one who led the foundation of Nalanda University, okay, which actually acquired the reputation so much so that the people from other countries used to apply to be part of Nalanda University. At the end of his reign, you will find a powerful, wealthy tribe, okay, called as the Pushyamitras. They defeated the Gupta army, and a branch of Huns also started coming from the Central Asia and attacking India from the northwestern region. Okay, but Kumar Gupta's reign went by, just like that. But it was his successor Skandagupta who actually had to face these Huns invasion, and he fought successfully against the Huns and he saved the empire. Okay, but this war you must know that say wherever there is a war, there is basically what? There is use of resources, there is use of human as well as capital as well as the military resources, and these resources are basically straining the government's treasury. So after Skandagupta's death, although Skandagupta was able to manage the affairs and he was able to defeat these Huns etc., but after him what is happening? His successors are weak. Okay, and they cannot save the Gupta empire from the Huns, and ultimately Gupta empire actually disappears, and then you will find that there was a rise of Yashodhavarman in Malwa. Okay, so now after studying about the rulers, we will move towards the Gupta administration. So you have many inscriptions, you have literary works also, and you also know that through coins also what is the Gupta society and the administration all about. So you know that the Gupta kings, they used to assume titles, okay, like Maharaj, Adhiraj, Parmeshwar, Samrat, Chakravartin. So that means you are giving yourself more importance. Okay, the king was assisted in this administration by council consisting of chief minister. It has Senapati. It also had other important officials. Okay, there was a high official called as Sandhi Vigraha. Okay, this is something like India's ambassadors who signed treaties and all, who manages India's foreign affairs. This person was not present in Mauryan Empire, and this is the difference that has been asked in one of the state services examination. Sandhi Vigraha was basically mentioned in Gupta inscriptions, and he is a minister of foreign affairs who's present in Gupta's time but not in Mauryan time. The king maintained a close contact with the provincial administration through a close officials and class of officials which were called as Kumar Amatyas and Ayuktas. Okay, provinces in the Gupta empire, they were called as Bhuktis. So basically what is happening, there's a king and he wants to keep a close eye on what is happening, so he has appointed Amatyas, remember, in Mauryan empire, but here Amatyas are called as the Kumar Amatyas and Ayuktas. Okay, now just like there was Gram and etc. Gram, Vishu, etc. Similarly, here you will find that there are Bhuktis, okay, which are basically provinces. So provinces in the sense you can call as states, and these provinces are under basically uparikas. Okay, now these provinces, or you can say these bhuktis, they were also divided into vishyas. Okay, and they will be headed by Vishyapati. Basically, vishyas are the district. This is like state is province, and then Vishya is a district, and then further district can be subdivided, and then you will find that they will be district will be further divided into Nagar, which will be under Nagar Shreshtis. Okay, and then there will be villages, and villages will be under the control of Gramikas. Okay, so you understood the hierarchy going from provinces, then to then basically state, district, then there is Nagar, and finally there is a village. Now, the Fayyan's account of Gupta administration also provides us with some useful information. Okay, he used to say that Gupta's administration was very mild and it was very benevolent. Okay, there were no restrictions on people's movement, and there was a large amount of personal freedom. There was no state interference in individuals' life. Everybody was given personal freedom and liberty. Punishments were not severe, unlike Mauryan Empire. Mauryan Empire punishments were severe, but here punishments were not severe. There was a fine imposed as a common punishment, and there was no spy system. Remember in Mauryas and even during the Chola Sangamesh time we had spies, but here you don't have. The administration was so efficient that the roads were kept like safe for travelers, and there was no fear of thieves. Okay, he mentioned that people were generally prosperous, and therefore crimes were also negligible, and that is the case with the Scandinavian countries also. So if you compare Scandinavian countries with the developing countries or least developed countries, you will find that Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, Finland, they are actually having lesser crimes, and that is because everybody is happy, everybody is earning enough to meet their needs. So why will they need to do crime? Fayyan had also appreciated the efficiency of the Gupta administration, as he was able to travel without fear throughout the Gangetic Valley. Okay, and on the whole you can say that Mauryan Empire was much more stricter, while Gupta Empire was much more liberal. Okay, now we'll talk about the social life in the Gupta Empire. So pre-Gupta period, we saw that there were a lot of foreign invasions happening, like there was Bactrians, Parthians, Scythians. Okay, and Indian society we already know has been very accommodative. Okay, we have given way to foreigners to come and settle here, and made them as as our own, treated them as our own. But during the Gupta period, the caste system became very rigid. There was like this Varna system which became Jati in the later Vedic period, and after that basically you will realize in Gupta period it became very rigid. Brahmins were at the top, okay, and they basically see they were Kshatriya next, and then Kshatriyas used to give Brahmins a lot of gifts, etc., and so that even Brahmins were well off. Okay, the practice of untouchability had slowly begun in this period, and you will find that Fayyan mentions that how Chandalas, they were segregated from the society because these were like the lowest class people, and they're like he also even went on to the extent of writing how miserable the condition of Chandalas was. Then comes about the position of women. Okay, so position of women in early Vedic period, we know that it was good because there was no sati, even women had choices of marrying. But in later Vedic period their position declined because child marriage started, sati also evidences we saw. Okay, then widow remarriage stopped happening. But in Mauryan period also we know that women position was not that great, but in Gupta period you will find the position has become further worsened. Okay, it has become much more miserable because now women are not being allowed to study also the religious texts like Purans, but earlier we know they were part of Sabha and Smriti. Okay, but now it is not the case. The subjection of women to men is happening, and it has become regularized. Okay, and now it is considered that women are weak and they need to be protected by men all the time. The practice of Swayamvar was given up, and the Swayamvar is basically giving women the choice to marry the guy of her choice, and that has stopped. And Manusmriti even also mentions about the early marriage of girls. Okay. In sphere of religion, you will find that Brahmanism, because it is supported by the ruler of the day also, so Brahmanism has has achieved its supreme during the Gupta period. It had two branches because Brahmanism or Hinduism has two branches, one who follow Vishnu and other who follow Shiva. So the one who follow Vishnu are Vaishnavites, and the other who follow Shiva are the Shaivites. So Vaishnavism and Shaivism. Most of the Gupta kings were Vaishnavites. They performed Ashwamedha sacrifices, and the worship of images and celebration of idols and rituals and religious festivals, it also became very prominent. Religious literatures like Puranas, they were composed during this period, and the progress of Brahmanism, it led to the neglect of Buddhism and Jainism, and that was reported by Fahian. Okay, but few Buddhist scholars, just like we saw there was a Buddhist scholar in Samudragupta's court, so therefore we know that there was Vasubandhu in Samudragupta's court. That means Buddhism was not at all like criticized, but it was just that since the ruler is following Vaishnavism, so he is basically more ardently spreading Vaishnavism. Okay, so you will find in western and southern India, Jainism flourished, and the great Jain council, the second Jain council, was held during this time, right? We remember. And then one, it was 500 AD, and then 500 BC, and then after that it was held in 350 AD. So this is the time when second Jain council will be held at Vallabhi, and the Jain canons, okay, of Shvetambars was written. Then we come to the art and culture of the Gupta Empire. So the Gupta period, it witnessed a tremendous progress. Okay, that is why I'm telling you it's a golden age in field of science, art, culture, literature. Okay, and that is why it is called as the golden age. A few scholars even call this period as a period of Renaissance. Okay, and this Renaissance, Reformation, that you will study in the world history chapter. So if you want this world history chapter from us, you need to write it in the comment box below. Okay, we will cover the entire world history starting from this Renaissance and Reformation, and then going till Industrial Revolution, then also covering American Revolution, French Revolution, and then we will study about basically World Wars, two World Wars, World War I and World War II. Okay, and then also rise of Germany and Hitler and Russian Revolution, etc. And then in the end we will also cover some like events, for example North Korea and South Korea, how the division happened, then Cuban Missile Crisis, then the Cold War, and then we will also discuss about the Soviet Union and how basically it collapsed in the collapse of Berlin Wall. Okay, so this all comes under the world history part. So if you want those lectures also, then you need to write in the comment box below. Okay, so you will find that art and culture, so this was a period of also called as Renaissance, and but some period, some people also say that that there was no dark period before Gupta rule, and therefore the cultural progress that was witnessing during the Gupta might have been the culmination of the past activities. But since we do not have any written evidences or anything about the past pre-Gupta period, okay, and how it might have been such glorious as Gupta Empire, so we generally avoid that. Then we have art and architecture. In the history of Indian art and architecture, you will find that Gupta period occupies an important place. Okay, both Nagar and Dravidian styles of art. Okay, these are the styles of temple making that you will study in your art and culture lectures. Okay, so temple making, there are three kinds: Nagara style, Dravida style, and one is their combination, which is Visara style. So you will find that both Nagara and Dravidian styles, they evolved during the Gupta period. Okay, I am not saying by Guptas, I am saying during Gupta period. So even though Dravida style of art temple making, it evolved in southern India where Guptas did not have much influence, but still the period or the timeline is such that in North India Guptas are ruling. The most of the architecture of this period has been lost because of the foreign invasions such as Huns. Okay, but still there are remaining sculptures and temples from which lot of information can be inferred. The temple at Deogarh, which is in Jhansi, and the sculptures and temples of Garhwaz near Allahabad, etc., they are very important figures to tell us something. Okay, very important art form. And you will find that there was no influence of Gandhara style here because it is indigenous, it is inside the country. But the beautiful statue of standing Buddha at Mathura reveals a little bit of Greek style also. Okay, then there is a Buddha statue at Sarnath also, and then there is a Bhitari monolithic pillar of Skandagupta, and this was asked in the state services examination as to where was Skandagupta's monolithic pillar present, and it is in Bhitari. The metallurgy had also made a wonderful progress during Gupta period. Metallurgy is basically when you can play with metals, you can mix and match, you can make alloys, and then you can discover new materials. The craftsmanship was so efficient in art of casting metals, statues, and as well as pillar. The gigantic copper statue of Buddha, okay, which was in Sultanganj and which is now in Birmingham Museum. Okay, Birmingham is in UK, United Kingdom. You will find that it was 7.5 feet height and nearly a ton weight. A ton means basically 1000 kgs. Okay, so it had so much of weight, and the Delhi iron pillar of Gupta is free from, like the Delhi iron pillar, remember, which is the Mehrauli pillar. This Mehrauli iron pillar is still now free of rust. But we know that iron basically when comes in oxygen, it forms F2O3, which is an oxide and which is basically the rust. But still there is some element mixed in this that we still hasn't catched rust, and that is why we are saying hasn't caught rust, and that is why we say that metallurgy was an important part of Gupta period. The paintings of Gupta period are also seen at Bagh Caves near Gwalior, okay, which is in MP, and the mural paintings of Ajanta mostly illustrate the life of Buddha as depicted in the Jataka stories. Ajanta has mostly basically the Jataka stories and more caves of Hinayan Buddhism than Mahayan Buddhism, but in Ellora you can find basically Mahayan Buddhism also. The paintings at Sri Girya in Sri Lanka, they were highly influenced by the Ajanta style, and this was again asked in the prelims examination that Sri Girya paintings in Sri Lanka, basically they reveal what? They look like what? They look like Ajanta style paintings in India. The Gupta coinage is also very remarkable. Samudragupta issued 8 kinds of gold coins, and these legends on them throw a lot of light on how what was the achievements of those marvelous kings. Okay, and similarly you will find that Chandragupta too and its successors, all of them issued gold and silver coins and copper coins of different variety, like different amount of copper, different amount of gold, etc., of different shapes and different sizes. Now we come to the most important part of Gupta Empire, which is the literature. So the Sanskrit language became a prominent language during the Gupta period because we know, and so was the Nagari script, because this was the script and the language used by Hari Sen to write the Allahabad pillar inscription. Okay, but here you will also find that there was a Brahmi script earlier, and that Brahmi script actually got evolved to form the Nagari script. The numerous works in classical Sanskrit came to be written in the forms of epic, lyrics, dramas, and prose. Okay. Samudragupta too, being himself a poet, as I already told you, that was mentioned in the Prashasti by Harisena, he also patronized a number of scholars. The court of Chandragupta too, as I told you, was celebrated by Navratnas. Navratna means Nav plus Ratnas. That means 9, which means Nav, and then Ratna means jewels. So he had 9 jewels in his court. Okay, and one of the famous jewels basically was Kalidas, whom we already know that he was the author of Shakuntalam, okay, Abhigyan Shakuntalam, and his masterpiece was Sanskrit drama, this Shakuntala, and it is considered one among the 100 best books in the world. He wrote other 2 plays also, which was basically Malvika Agnimitra, which was about the Agnimitra Sunga. Okay, remember the son of Pushyamitra Sunga, who was the founder of Sunga dynasty, who killed the last ruler of Mauryan dynasty. So that Agnimitra Sunga, okay, his book was also there, which was written by Kalidas, and which was Malvika Agnimitra. And then there was another book of Vikramor Vasya. Okay, his 2 well-known epics, just like we have Ramayana and Mahabharata. Similarly, Kalidas also wrote 2 epics, which were Raghu Vamsa and Kumar Sambhav. Okay, Ritu Sambar and Meghadatta are his 2 lyrical sets. These all books, before we move forward, you should please, I request you that please remember these books names. They have been asked before, they have been asked even in the state services examination, and they have a high possibility of getting asked anywhere. Then you have Vishakadatta, which you already know, Devi Chandra Guptam and Mudra Rakshasam. So he was also another celebrated author of this period, and we already know the 2 Sanskrit dramas, Mudra Rakshasam and Devi Chandra Gupta. Then there was another one by the name of Shudrak, okay, and he was a renowned poet of his age, and his book name was Mrichat Chattika, okay, Mrichat Chattika, and it was a rich in human and pathos content, and it was basically a story about a merchant, etc. Then you have Bhairavi's Kirta Arjunya, which is the story of the conflict between the Arjun and the Shiva. Okay, then there was another one, Dandin, who was the author of Kavya Dasra and Das Kumar Charita. So Dandin was writing Das Kumar Charita and Kavya Darsa, and another important work of this period, which was written by which was written by Subandhu, was Vasav Datta. So I know there are a lot of people to remember, but first is Kalidas, and then all of his books. Then you have basically Visakha okay, then you have Shudrak, then you basically have Bhairavi, okay, then you have Dandin, then you have Subandhu. Okay, this is what we have done, and then there will be Vishnu Sharma, who composed these Panchatantra stories. Okay, like the small stories which were also giving moral lessons. And then you will find that there was one more Buddhist author called as Amar Simha, who compiled a book or a lexicon called as Amar Kosha. So it's very easy because Amar Simha wrote Amar Kosha. Then you will find that this is also the period when Purans also got written, and they were compiled during their present form. So there were 18 Purans, and the most important among them were Vishnu, Vayu, Matsya and Bhagavad. Okay, Mahabharata and Ramayana are also 2 epics which were written during this time. Ramayana by Valmiki and Mahabharata by Vedvyas. Okay, then we come to the last part of the Gupta dynasty or Gupta Empire, which we need to know is about the science and the scientific things that happened during the Gupta Empire. Okay. So here you will find that Gupta period also witnessed a brilliant activity in the sphere of mathematics, astronomy, astrology and medicine. Okay, this is the same Gupta period where we have Aryabhatta. Okay, but before you move forward, Aryabhatta was not one of the Navratnas present in the Chandragupta II's court. Okay, because this has been asked in one of the state service examinations, and that time I got a lot of messages from students saying, this should have been the answer, or Aryabhatta should have been there, but he was not one of the 9 jewels of the Chandragupta II's court. Okay, and this was because Aryabhatta, whatever he said, that was not accepted by another renowned astronomer that time, which was basically Varamira, who was also an astronomer, an astrologer, and a mathematician, and he was present in the Chandragupta II's court. So obviously, two conflicting views cannot be present in the same court. So Aryabhatta was a great mathematician and astronomer. We already know, because India's first satellite was also called as Aryabhatta. He wrote the book Aryabhatyam in 499 AD. It deals with mathematics and astronomy, and it basically tells you the occurrence of solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, and Aryabhatta was also the first one to declare that Earth was spherical, okay, in shape, and it rotates on its own axis. However, these views were rejected, as I told you, by the later astronomers like Varamira and Brahmagupta. Now, Varamira was a very famous mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, and a writer, and he composed 3 books. Okay, one is Pancha Siddhantika, which is basically Panch means 5 and Siddhantika means some rules. So it is basically 5 astronomical systems. Then he was also great authority in astrology, as I already told you, and he wrote Brihad Samhita. What did he write? Brihad Samhita, which is a work in Sanskrit literature. And then he wrote another book which is called as the Brihad Jatak, okay, which is basically about his work on astrology. So now you must be wondering, what a wonderful man. He knew everything, and that is why you will find that Aryabhatta could never become the Navratnas. So Varamira wrote 3 books. I'm repeating again: Pancha Siddhantika, which is the 5 astronomical systems, okay, which is a basically work on astrology, not astronomy, astrology. Basically, astrology is something that you read your hand and palms, etc. So that one, okay. Then he wrote Brihad Samhita, which is basically Samhita. Samhita means compilation, and Brihad means everything. So it's a compilation of everything: geography, astronomy, astrology, architecture, weather, animals, marriage, society, everything. And then there is Brihad Jatak, which extremely tells you that it's a collection of Jataka stories. So it is considered basically a standard work on astrology stories. Then in the field of medicine, you will find that there is Vagbhatta, which lived during this period, and I told you that Kanishka had 2 jewels, or 2 you can say medicinal marvels during his time. One was Charak, another was Shastra, remember, and the third one, the third medical trio, is basically present during Chandragupta II's time, who is also called as Vagbhatta, okay, and his book is called as Ashtang Samagra. Okay, Samagra means basically collection, and Ashtang means like 8. So that means collection of 8 something. So basically collection of 8 branches of medicines. So Gupta's time had only one medicinal marvel called as Vagbhatta, who wrote this 8 branches of medicine called Ashtang Samagra, but the rest 2 were present during the Kanishka's time. Okay. With this, we actually complete Gupta rule, and then we will start with the lesson 10, which is about the